Buddhism has been practiced on the Korean peninsula for more than 16 centuries. It survived long centuries of repression under a Confucian dynasty and also challenges to monastic rules during the Japanese occupation in the 20th century. But in recent decades it has faced its biggest challenge yet: militant Christianity. South Korea is the only East Asian nation in which a Western religion, Christianity, outnumbers the largest Asian religion, which is Buddhism. Catholicism was introduced in Korea in the early 17th century but was subjected to waves of persecution. But in the late 19th century Korea began to open itself to the outside world, and religious pluralism in Korea was better tolerated. By the end of the Japanese occupation in 1945, approximately 2% of Korea's population was Christian. But by 1991, 25% of South Korea's population was Christian. The reasons for this are complex, but ties forged between South Korea and the United States during the Korean War appear to have been a major factor. Among other things, Christian chaplains somehow monopolized the South Korean military chaplaincy and converted many soldiers, especially young draftees. Chun Doo-won was a military general and Christian who served as president of South Korea from 1980 to 1988. As president, he adopted anti-Buddhist policies. Historic temples were taken over by the government and turned into tourist attractions, for example. When monks of the Jogye order of Soen, Zen, Buddhism, the largest Buddhist sect in Korea, criticized Chun, the government began to raid Buddhist temples, including the Jogye main temple in Seoul, and arrest monks. 55 monks were sent to retention camps, although none were ever convicted of anything. Other monks were subjected to torture. The abbot of one Jogye temple died as a result. Throughout Chun's administration, Buddhist monks and nuns were kept under surveillance and frequently accused of being communist sympathizers. During Chun's administration, conservative Protestants began to publicly denounce Buddhism and vandalize Buddhist temples and art. For example, in February 1984, red crosses and dirt were smeared on Buddhist wall paintings in a temple near Seoul. In 1985, a Protestant minister named Kim Jingyu and a layman named Kim Song-ae separately organized meetings to denounce Buddhism. That same year, some men identified as Christians drove nails into tires of cars parked outside a Zen center and poured corrosive chemicals into the engines. They played gospel songs through a loudspeaker to disrupt the Buddhist service. Then the temple burnings began. In 1986, an ancient Jogye ceremonial hall, listed as a national treasure, was burned to the ground. A local Christian man confessed to the crime, but police did not prosecute, citing lack of evidence. In 1987, a fundamentalist Christian was apprehended after setting fires that destroyed 2 temple buildings. In 1988, a fire at a Jogye training center destroyed altar paintings considered to be national treasures. In the next few years, through the remaining 1980s and 1990s, several other arsonists destroyed or substantially damaged approximately 20 more Buddhist temple buildings. During this time, even more Buddhist temples and art were vandalized. Vandals often painted red crosses on art and smashed or decapitated Buddha statues. In a few cases, Christians, including clergy, were caught in the act but not charged. In 1992, men broke into the studios of a new Buddhist radio station 2 days before it was to begin broadcasting. They smashed all of the station's recording and transmission equipment, using the head of a Buddha to break into recording booths and destroy the computers and equipment. No arrests were made. In 1945, approximately 2% of Korea's population was Christian. But by 1991, 25% of South Korea's population was Christian. Beginning in 1980, many of the newly converted Christians began to burn and vandalize Buddhist temples and art. More than 20 temple buildings were destroyed by arson, crosses were smeared on temple wall paintings, Buddha statues were smashed or decapitated. In the 1980s, the government also began to oppress Buddhism. Under Chun Doo-won, b. 1931, who served as president of South Korea from 1980 to 1988, monasteries were sometimes raided and monks arrested on various charges, although none were ever convicted. 1990 to 2000. Burning and vandalism of Buddhist temples continued through the 1990s. Buddhists and other non-Christians serving in the military were sometimes ordered to attend Christian services by their commanders. Some public school teachers were found teaching Bible lessons. One told the class that Buddhist children were followers of Satan and restricted their class activities. In 1995, young fundamentalist Christians began a campaign of aggressive proselytizing on the campus of Dongguk University in Seoul, a Buddhist school, handing out anti-Buddhist literature in front of the school's main Buddha statue. An investigative report in the Korea Herald published in July 1998 quoted a Buddhist Dharma teacher named Lee Chiran, "For them the Christians, this is a war. Much of the mainstream media is dominated by Christians, and coverage of anti-Buddhist incidents is rare. Many people don't understand what's going on." After 2000, for a time, the incidents of aggression against Buddhists and Buddhist institutions became less frequent, although the over-representation of Christians in government positions sometimes posed problems for Buddhists. The election of Lee Myung-bak as President of South Korea in 2008 began a new round of tension, however. Lee, a Presbyterian, had raised alarms as mayor of Seoul when he said he would consecrate his city to God. Then, as president, he chose an almost all-Christian cabinet. Out of 16 cabinet seats, there were 12 Christians and 1 Buddhist. Shortly after that, the Ministry of Land, Transport and Maritime Affairs published a map of Seoul on its website that omitted all Buddhist temples and shrines but gave the location of every Christian church. Then police stopped and searched the car of the head of the Jogye of Soen, Zen, Buddhism, looking for members of a faction protesting the importing of beef. About this same time, videos began to circulate showing a Protestant minister leading his congregation in shouts calling for the collapse of Buddhist temples, and another in which a prominent Protestant minister said Buddhist monks are wasting their time. They should convert to Jesus. Is there any Buddhist country in the world that is rich? In August 2008, an estimated 60,000 people, including about 7,000 monks, rallied in front of the Seoul City Hall to protest religious discrimination. Tensions subsided, to a point, when several high-level officials who had been accused of religious favoritism to Christians visited Buddhist temples to apologize. More recently, people of South Korea, generally not just Buddhists, appear to be growing weary of the antics of the aggressive Christian proselytizers.